After a 2-month break, we're back racing with the 4x4 Mega World TIORC Series up in the Northwest. All this action will be, as always, brought to you by 4x4 Mega World, along with Zarko Motors and Goldco Midas. The action in the 4x4 Mega World Inland Off-Road Championship returns for the second half of the season after a 2-month winter break. Hopefully the majority of the dust is out the way, but certainly fresh conditions. With 4 rounds done and 4 rounds still remaining, the championship is starting to get into shape, but in most classes there are still no clear runaway leaders. The second half of the season will decide who will be our inaugural champions for this brand new series. The Tempe Airfield just outside Bloemfontein was the venue for the Goldco Midas 250. Round 5 of the championship, an icy, freezing cold morning, started and greeted the competitors as the temperatures plummeted overnight to well below freezing. The whole town of Bloem were going to be out in force to watch the spectacle unfold as spectators were doing their last-minute adjustments in the DSP and getting ready for the 230 kilometers of grueling off-road terrain ahead. The DSP was buzzing as everyone got themselves ready for the first task of the day, the prologue, to decide the starting order going into the main event. All the crews seem to have made use of the 2-month gap to make sure that the pits were stacked with just over 40 entries. All crews were full, ready, prepped, new tyres, some with new livery, and all good to go. It's a course that hadn't been raced in a long time, so it was going to be fun to see who was going to be able to tame the multiple quarries and open farmlands of Bloemfontein. At the early morning drivers briefing, the top 6 seeded competitors took part in the compulsory and customary draw to see who would be opening up the track to tackle the first task ahead, 56 kilometers of the prologue. This event was held on virgin terrain, and a confirmation that no race had been held in this area before, so briefing was paramount. As usual, the prologue is tackled by the crews in 2-minute dust gap intervals to determine their main starting race position and time gaps. When it came to the main race though, this time instead of 2 loops of approximately 100 kilometers each, the crews faced one massive loop of 173 Ks starting at midday. The ceremonial start got proceedings underway with the competitors driving up the main road, getting themselves into race position to see how the rest of this incredible second half of the TIORC 4x4 Mega World Championship season was going to unfold. With once again a solid combination of club, regional and national cars making the lineup, it was anyone's game. Join us after the break to first answer the question of who won the prologue.
This week on Tuned In SA, we meet up with a VW fan who's completely changed the look of his car.
We take a look at our top 5 finalists for the Tuned In SA Makeover competition.
And Leon goes for an exhilarating ride in the Subaru.
That's Tuned In SA, only on Ignition TV channel 189.
First car out into the dry and dusty conditions was going to be Stefan van Pletsen and Jaco Pieterse as they set off in the number 1 spot, having had the added task of now opening up the road. Although their 6-litre V8 Chevy-powered space frame is by no means short of horsepower, they really battled to get the traction down in the thick sand, only with the 2-wheel drive going to the back tyres. They were going to have their work cut out against the more powerful Class T cars with their all-wheel drive systems. But as the season has proven so far, the Live Lesotho Chenoweth is near on unstoppable at each of the events we travel the tour with. So far in 2019, this has been the team and the car to beat. Making an appearance for the first time in this championship is Richard Leek Jr. in the T96, now accompanied by experienced navigator Zahir Baronia in their ATS Ford Ranger. Reporting no issues during the prologue, the pair settled in nicely to get themselves ready. Fifth overall was a sweet qualifying spot for the guys that were going to go and chase down the win in the Class Ts. Production vehicles was definitely up for grabs at round 5 of the championship. An old buddy of Richard as well, his former national rally co-driver, alongside now with driver Ernst Roberts, as they set off in their familiar machine, the Nissan Navara. The 2018 season was in the side-by-sides, getting himself loose and ready to go off-road racing. His results showed good enough form that he was quickly able to make the massive jump up into the all-wheel drive full factory spec Class Ts, and now is a massive threat. On the season, Dylan Fencher and Donovan Lubber flew a lone 4x4 Mega World flag this time around, with Jason missing in action for this event. A steady run and no problems, and another good qualifier inside of the top 6. Just over a minute and a quarter off the pole position. Top 10 was good enough to see them still challenge high when it came out to the full-time race. Wonderful shots giving us an idea of some of the quarry pits that we were going to be landing in as we traversed 170 Ks later on in the day. 4x4 Mega World putting on a great show with this championship, and one of the standout drives of the season is Dylan Fencer and Lubber getting themselves up into podium contention. For Malcolm Koch and his son, France, were out in their Ford Ranger. France is so good on the note calling as well. He's an extremely experienced 125 and 250 off-road racer and can run numbers to get himself into championship position. So the kids' eyes were going to be fast, and Dad was going to be even faster. This time out, charging and getting themselves flying in the former NWM factory Ford Ranger. Still battling to get himself used to the left-hand drive format of the vehicle, but they still qualified well. In fact, getting themselves up into a position to get second overall. Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis have shown good form at these events, and once again put themselves up in a high position. They became the team to beat going forward into the rest of the day's event. A quick shakedown before loading up the car, nerves were all settled, and clinching the win in the prologue meant they were going to be going out with no dust to chase down. But, of course, there was going to be the flip of the coin. They were going to go out into virgin terrain, so it was going to be this crew in the T5 that would have to open up the afternoon's racing event. Francois van der Walt and Gerry Prinsloo, they certainly don't lack speed, but the first half of the season has seen them winning twice, but also scoring DNFs at 2 races, so 2 for 2 for these guys. Was the Gold Co Midas 250 going to be a turning point on their season to find out where those reliability issues were lurking? Well, things started off well with the pair coming home first in Class D and inside of the top 10 overall. So far, so good, but it was still early days at round 5 of the championship. They desperately needed a finish on the season. Vos Prinsloo was now joined on the side by Andre Vermeulen. They started off well but had a host of issues which caused them to DNF the prologue, thereby taking a time penalty, and they were going to have to fight through from the back of the pack in the main race. For Jannie Visser and son Peter, always fast and often mixing it up with the higher Class T cars, but this was not to be their event. No issues up until the 25k marker, they were running good. Then they hit the clutch problems. It packed up, and that was the pair out. They could have easily been a top 5 threat had that situation not occurred. For Willem de Tooy and Kevin Riley, coming off a disappointing result at the Gauteng 250 where they were expected to go for another high finish, they were eager to get going and chase down for another win. That was not to be though. They got horribly lost in the prologue, losing 2 minutes as a result, and dropped way down the standings So once again, it was going to be a come-from-behind drive. Not that on the sideline, that was anything to be frowned on. This is one of the most exciting crews to watch when they are on the back foot. We have seen them in the past come from almost dead last to challenge for a win. They do like to make their lives a little bit more interesting though, and possibly more difficult than it should be. For Marcus Labuskakny and Neil Putter, the pair always mix it up at the sharp end of the field in both qualifying and in the main race. It was not to be, however, also as mechanical issues put paid to their race during the qualifying in the prologue. It was going to be another hard charge from behind for the aggressive pair in the G11. That meant it was wide open for the Class G side-by-sides at round 5 of the series. For event, series and category stalwarts Werner and Leon Mostert, they were having an absolute ripper of a run. Round about halfway through the stage, they managed to pick up a puncher, but listen to this. Even though they got a puncher on a short prologue, they were still able to come home and tag the fastest time in category. Not just that, they also went top 10 overall. That was putting them in a strong position to go forward into the afternoon's event. Class G's has been an absolute incredible journey these last couple of seasons, and it's the Mosterts that are waving the flag high and proud. Vickers Haasbroek and Jurgen Smith, nothing major to report except the fact that they lost just over a minute to the class leaders. They were setting themselves up for a bit of a rough run. Clearly some navigational issues, nothing too mechanical, but they were going to have to charge through the rest of the pack, even though they were just inside of the top 20. Top 20 is the sweet spot. Outside the top 20, you are dealing with a lot of traffic out there. There was still a chance for the G21 to come through in the main event. Christo Rose and Tion Swart coming back from their first event, racing the Toyota Desert 1000 just a couple of weeks back, also dropped the hammer as hard as they dare to try and get the moves going. They positioned themselves inside of the top 20. They got 17th, which put them at number 2 in G class. They were on for a provisional second place at this stage of the event. After the last couple of seasons in production vehicles, Glenn Turon and Craig Galvin were starting to get comfortable in the side-by-sides. This was only their second event in the new car. Craig Galvin, as a championship-winning navigator, was going to be able to keep them on track, but it was out of the track where they had the issues in the mid-season break waiting for spares to arrive. The team had had literally no time to get testing and set up the car before Thursday on the event. Whilst the two of them had not raced together before, they settled into a nice pace and brought the car home in one piece, ready to take on the main event. A podium was definitely in the future and a possibility for the G110. Keith McInerney and Tielo Mochabileli out in the ex-John Telford National P-Class winning championship car. The pressure was on them to now produce what the car was capable of. And produce they did. Even though their GPS malfunctioned, they still set the fastest time in Class P in the prologue, meaning that the rest of the pack were going to be chasing up to their bumper on the main event. The P3 got themselves up nicely high. 8th overall, one of their strongest runs on the season so far. This was going to set them up absolutely perfectly for the big show. Early season teething problems seem to be a thing of the past. For the D1 of Lawrence Van Wyk and Marnie Roux, with an up and down season so far, the defending Class D Drivers champion Lawrence was hoping for improved results in the D1. Top 12 was a nice setup, and he was going to be chasing right up. He only had one car between himself in the main race to get up to the Van der Waals. D class was definitely on. For Francois Smit and Ferdy Petersen, coming off a high-speed rollover at the previous event that took them out of contention at the Gauteng 250, the pair were eager to perform well, leading into the rest of the season. A trouble-free run saw them qualify second in Class P, a mere 34 seconds adrift of the fastest qualifier. Their celebrations were short-lived, however, as when they arrived back after celebrating that good run in the prologue, they found a ton of gearbox oil leaking out of the skid plate. The culprit, a busted side shaft seal. It was going to be hit and miss whether they would actually make the main event. Behind Kruger and Paul Murray, leading the Class D battle at the halfway mark of the season. The pair were certainly the ones to beat in class, having a rock-solid, consistent season. Playing it safe though this time around, 21st was going to put them right in the middle of the pack come the main event, starting after lunchtime. At this stage, they were outside of podium placings. But remember, in the second half of the championship, it's about consolidation, survival, and bringing home finishes every single event. The hard work had been done in the first 3 rounds. Now it was time to hang on to it. For the S11 of Pete and Benjamin Kutsia, they had a nice run, getting themselves well high up the order as well. 7th overall in the queue. And with around about 10 cars between themselves and the fastest of the chasing Class S's, it was going to be their race to lose. So Pete and Benjamin Kutsia coming strong in the second half of this series. For the T29 pairing, Johan Strauss and Alzon Fenter. No great shakes during the qualifying run. They got themselves just around about the halfway marker of the squad for the morning. It meant they were going to be right mid-pack in the first couple of 100 Ks for the afternoon loop. 23rd in the queue. Not a bad run, but you were going to be right in the mixed bag of a combination of category and class vehicles. And the prologue was giving us some hint as to how dry, dusty and loose the afternoon session would be. A crew that should and could have posted one of the faster times of the morning session. Tony and Mike Gavea, unfortunately a broken ball joint on the front suspension, then a training arm and diff caused them a big loss of time. The P51 eventually plummeting down to 18th. They were still in with a chance of trying to close up on Willem de Tooy. In fact, they only lost around about half a second to Willem de Tooy, who had qualified in 3rd, so a podium was still a possibility. One of the many entries coming in at round number 5 for the N1 4x4 squad. Tions de Tooy and James O'Mahony in the D11 did a very nice job of it as well. Also tagging a top 20 finish, 19th overall for them, and still in with a shout of a podium for the Class Ds. Ds were scattered the whole way through the field, making it one of the hardest wins and podiums to call on the event. For Stijn Villiers and Richard Carey as local residents to Bloem, the crowds were definitely going to be out and waving the flag for these guys in the Class S twin-turbo 3.2 diesel Ford Ranger. After one outing in a Class A Zarco at the Gauteng 250, now they were back in the big dog, running numbers and getting a good run going in their trouble-free prologue. 15th was one of their highest positions in a prologue to date. All turbos and black smoke were firing nicely at this stage of the game. Louis Weishart and Heineke Erasmus in the D44 also put paper to pen, got the hammer down, and brought home a great top 16 drive. It was clear that the prologue was starting to cut up and rut up, And the crew starting a little bit further down the order looked like they had some advantage with the track opened up and marked nicely as well, allowing the cars further down the order a slight advantage to try and pick up the pieces and bonus points. The E1 of the almost indestructible and untouchable Andre Geldenhuys and Victor Fincham qualified second in Class E, but a long way down the order, meaning they were going to have a busy day, stuck in the dust of many a key player. But still, they are a championship squad, which means all they want at this stage of the game is top 5 finishes to make the points and numbers add up come the end of the inaugural running of the 4x4 Mega Worlds TIOC Championship Series in 2019. For Dirk Putter and Henny Hutting, they were going to put themselves into third in category, but they literally had Fincham and Geldenhuys up the road from them, meaning it was definitely going to be on in the first couple of Ks. A slender 30 seconds is all that separated second and third in the E-Class, Fincham and Putter. It was going to be fun to see how hard Putter could get the hammer down in the opening 50 Ks to try and close the gap and make the pass. Dust was going to be his biggest concern in the afternoon session. For Aki and Jandre Kruger, they also put together a smooth run in their prologue. They qualified 4th in Class E and also not too far off. It was the Fincham, Putter and Kruger show. And exactly what we like to see starting to unfold. The Class E's very equally matched, and if not the most equally matched cars, categories, drivers and co-drivers of the series. For Cyril and Jaco Oosthuizen in the D111, no issues on the car. Still a development year as they are running the Range Rover Evoque 2-litre turbo petrol engine now and trying to get the most out of it. In the cold air at Bloemfontein, turbos will have been absolutely loving the conditions. Inside of a top 30 overall, 28th place for the Green Hulk. For the E11 of Dolph de Toy and Ben Sutherland, who unfortunately broke their gearbox off the start line at the Gauteng 250. Simply being in this race and getting out of first gear was going to be an achievement. The E11 ran good pace the whole way through the morning session as well to try and challenge and get a move on. They would eventually go on to go fastest in Class E, leading out on Fincham, Putter and Kruger for the stacked field, all running inside of the top 25. For Regan Austin and Warren Foss running new colours in the second half of the season, the D16 was out in their new livery for custom rides. 5th in category and down in 27th, so it definitely hadn't all gone according to plan. They lost front brakes and had to slow down before each of the long corners. It cost them heaps of time, but this is definitely a squad and a pair and a vehicle that can climb the ranks come race day. The afternoon session would ask a lot of them, and hopefully they'd have time to do the running repairs and make sure the car was pinpoint perfect once again. For the D22 pair of Wayne Smith and Billy Dupria, returning to the series after a lengthy absence, they broke their CV in the prologue and they had to take it easy, nursing the car all the way back home, but determined to make the finish. They did just that. They stayed in it to win it. They were going to be starting the afternoon event down in 34th, close to the back end of the pack. But for them, it was simply a return to the sport that they love, and they just wanted to bring the car to the finish. For Suma Smit and Gabby Petersen, steady as always, and with 3 consecutive third places under their belts, the all-ladies team were looking forward to the challenge of the new route and what it would throw at them. A faulty intercom connection, though, meant the prologue was dispatched with a number of hand signals, as many of the communications were lost now between Gabby and Suma. Down outside the top 25 is going to be 30th place for them, and a long, dry, dusty, wild run in the afternoon session, with hopefully the comms system rectified for the main event. Comms can so often be a decider in these events, and so often it is the easiest fix as well. The P111 of Henny van der Merwe and Lane Peltzer in the second entry coming out of the Liv Lesotho squad, so partnering up with Van Pletzen. Had a pretty good run the whole way through, even though they were down on power and suspension, running one of the older category Class Bs. Everything was going good until around about 5Ks before the end of the prologue, when their accelerator pedal bracket came off, pretty much ending their charge for the prologue. They would be part of the mass start, finishing outside the top 30. Always great at the halfway marker, or certainly the beginning of the second half of the season, to welcome new blood rookies. Sean Kruger and Johan Becker had a nice run of it in their vehicle, an A14, bringing home a top 29 placing. That was going to set them up nicely. But remember, prologue was a sprint event. The rest of the afternoon was going to be endurance. No mistakes, and certainly no punches or mechanicals would be allowed to try and maintain a top 30 finish come the end of play. Still, the prologue for our rookies, Kruger and Becker, brought it home to make sure they were in the lineup for the main event. For Berenik and Piers Botma, a bit of a problem on the gearbox this time around. Stuck in fourth, just 3 kilometers into the over 60k prologue. They were going to be absolutely smoking the clutch and the gearbox to try and maintain that. Eventually, they decided discretion was the better part of valor. Pulled out of the prologue at the 26 kilometer marker to join the mass start in the afternoon race. Clutching, clutching, clutching. You can hear it, just not the gears where it needs to be. So at the end of the prologue, it was definitely going to be time for a lot of the crews to get working frantically to make sure their vehicles were able to get into the main queue. There's that busted seal on Francois Smith's vehicle, and here's confirmation of what the breakdown was in the prologue. It was Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis that went fastest ahead of the Cox, with Stefan Van Pletzen and Jaco Pieterse, the rock-solid pairing on the season, third ahead of Robertson Kerner and Leek and Bedunya. Down in 14th place, it was going to be fun to see what Willem de Tooy and Kevin Riley could do to see if they could still become the giant killers in the P17 and plough all their way to the front once again. Werner and Leon were the fastest of the Class Gs, within 8th, Keith McInerney and Moch Bileli, first of the Ps. Join us after the break as we go into the main event.
Coming up on Last Stop Garage, a nearby town got hit hard by a flood.
All kinds of damage. Flood spoiled this beautiful little community.
The community is surrounded by water, and there's no way to get the garbage out. So, we're going to build a barge. It's going to take a lot of wood, a lot of foam, and a whole lot of work.
It's good, Cor. We got her, man. We got her? Yeah.
But whatever it takes, it's worth it.
There's no handshakes in this one.
Thank you all so much.
Lots of practicality on the bike show this week as we put two scooters head to head. There's another famous riding tip from Don, a new flip-face helmet from Harry, and a bit of a rant from Matt.
So as we head out into the fields around Bloemfontein, the excitement and tension were building in equal measure down in the DSP, the designated service park. This time around, and a slightly different look and feel to the event. Everyone knew they're going to be out there for the big loop. No chance to come into the pits. So Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis knew that they had done a great job of the morning session to go out and have a 26 slender second advantage over Malcolm Koch, with Van Pletzen right on the wheel, Ernst Roberts, and just after that Richard Leek. With all the time gaps now decided from the prologue in the morning session, it was now straight flat out racing, so whoever crossed the finish line first was going to be guaranteed the winner. Dust was definitely going to be a key factor. For Richard Leek and Zahir Bedunya, they were going to be starting down inside the top 5, but straight into the dust of 4 of the key players. Dylan Fenter and Donovan Lubber took it easy off the start. They had a slightly bigger gap, around about 2 minutes off the back wheel of Leek and Bedunya. So they were probably going to have one of the fastest first sectors. In other words, the first 50 kilometers were going to be clean air for them until they caught up with the dust of the top 5 leaders. For McInerney, they were going to be charging out front, but they had Van der Walt right on their wheel, closely followed by the Mostert pairing of Werner and Leon. And we know that these side-by-sides are super fast and brave in the early and late kilometers. For Werner and Leon in the G2, they've done an amazing run with a flat tire to still hold pole position in category, and they were inside the top 10 overall. For Lawrence Van Veek and Mani Leroux in the D1, they were around about a minute off the back wheel of the side-by-side, but they had a long way to catch up to the flying D33 of the Van der Waals. The fastest and top qualifier second in the Class Gs for Tehran and Galvin. They were going to put themselves in a sweet spot. 3:39 had them sitting just 30 seconds in reality off the back wheel of the Mosterts, and they were going to be chased down by the comeback kids. DeToy and Riley were danger men, as they were always going to drop the hammer hard in the P17 to try and close things down. Even though they had their issues in the prologue, they were still only 3 minutes 54 of the overall race leaders, with Vivier and Carey doing the chase down on them. The emphatic qualifying coming out of the N1 4x4 of the D44 of Weishalt and Erasmus put themselves high up in the order, qualifying 16th, just over 4 minutes off the back wheel of the leaders. The battle for third in the side-by-sides was going to be an interesting one, with Rose and Swart trailed by Gaveyas, and straight after that, DeToy and O'Mahony. It was literally a horsepower run down into the first tech zones. For now, the G22 of Rose and Swart were okay, and in reality, for the overall race, sitting around about a minute and a half off the next crew up the road. A rough qualifier for Vickers Haasbroek and Jurgen Smith. They would have to do an incredible job over the next 150 Ks plus to get themselves back on point to try and challenge for a podium placing. With the crews a little bit further down the order, almost matched on times, DeToy and Sutherland and Strauss and Fenter set off in each other's wheel tracks. For separate classes though, E and T. To try and stay out of the dust, a couple of drivers were tagging some inside lines as they headed out into the fields. For Kildenace and Fencham, it was steady as she goes. They simply wanted to get the finish done. And then the freight train of E-classes of Putter and Hutting were going to be chased down very shortly as well, as the battle in E-class was between the DeToys, Fincham and Kildenace, the Putters and the Krugers. For Benjamin and Pete Kotzer, out of position after qualifying so well inside the top 7, they were now starting way down the queue, and we're going to be stuck right in the mix-up between Kruger, Voss and Oosthuizen. They should have started 7th in the queue. That was going to make life extremely hard. Clearly a problem in the pits before the main event. It's probably cost them of a category victory. For Sorrel and Jaco, the Range Rover powered Land Rover looked like it was in good shape. And for our newbies, Sean Kruger and Johan Becker, they were going to be stuck right in that Range Rover roost. First event on the tour. Welcome to cross-country racing, straight into the dust. For Suma Smith and Gabby Peterser, communications were back on. They were talking the same language, they could hear and talk to each other. And coming out of the prologue, that was absolutely massive. Now they could do what they needed to do and charge up the field. Expect to see them climb up inside the top 20 come the end of play. For Vos Prinsloo and Ando Vermeulen, another crew that had their massive issues in the prologue, but should have been one of the top 5 qualifiers. The T41 was going to be one to watch out for, to see how high they could plough the field. And for Wayne Smith and Billy Dupria, after their issues in their qualifying run, the D22 was starting almost dead last and would have an extremely busy day of it. This wasn't one of our race vehicles, although they could have possibly qualified in the dust. At least they'd be able to see. The crew and everyone was going to be out watching the action unfold. Join us after the break to see who walks away with the wins in each of the classes and categories at round 5.
Coming up, a record-breaking hill climb at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. Mini goes electric, the world premiere of the Mini Cooper SE. And sports car meets SUV, the new Audi SQ8.
Tonight on Highway Patrol. Is this man really above the law?
There's a diplomatic status going on here, and you need to be aware of that.
Doesn't every speeder wish they could say this when clocked on the radar?
I'm a radar engineer, actually.
And a speeding rider who's been down this road before.
With the Inland Off-Road Championship brought to you by 4x4 Mega World, as well as an air show happening out at the Tempe Aerodrome, it was going to be busy, pumping, and there were going to be plenty of crowds checking out action up in the sky and down on the ground. We caught up halfway through the event. Suma and Gabby keeping a steady pace whilst everyone else was starting to fall by the wayside. Their strategy was paying off for the ladies. They worked their way up to second in Class P and third overall of the specials. However, Lady Luck dealt them the cruelest blow. With only 30 kilometers to go to the finish, their clutch cried out, and they were forced to retire, coming out of one of their highest positions of their event. The D22 soldiered on, carefully nursing the car, which had already broken the CV joint after the prologue. But for Wayne Smith and Billy Duprier, amazingly enough, they still managed to tag a finish, third in Class D. What a story. For the G110 of Glentoran and Craig Galvin, about 1/3 distance into the main event, they hit a donga, damaging the front drive shaft. After, as in the case of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, they phoned a friend to get some advice on how to do the servicing. They eventually got the offending item out the way and continued the rest of the race with just one wheel powering them forward. Eventually a 4th place finish in category, just one position off what could have been a great podium. The pace is there. The car is coming together nicely on the tour. Watch out for seeing what they can do at round number 6. With a modest approach to this event, simply trying to get the finish done, it was problems early on with a flat tyre. Then, with 130 k's to go, a seized rear diff. After disconnecting it, they soldiered on for 130 k's with only front-wheel drive. A mean feat considering the thick dust that they had to contend with for the rest of the route. A finish, though, nonetheless, for the E1 keeps them in the championship chase and actually gave them 19th position overall. Front-wheel drive also affects braking, by the way, as you can tell. For Pete and Benjamin Kotzer, who had done an incredible job in their qualifying run, but problems between the prologue and the start of the official event had them starting way down the order. They charged as hard as they dare and eventually were rewarded with a top 18 finish. But the class victory was way, way up the road. And it was a class victory that definitely had their name on it at the end of that emphatic prologue run. For the E4 of Putter and Hutting, they kept their car in one piece, just lacking a bit of top speed in the thick sandy straights, but they got it home in 3rd place in Class E to retain their overall lead in Production Vehicle Championship as we head to round number 5. Putter and Hutting in great form in 2019. Extremely sandy conditions asked a lot of the gearbox and drive systems on the vehicles, and there was going to be a lot of late nights between events 5 and 6 to make sure nothing had taken too much of a beating out there in Bloem. For Aki and Jandre Kruger, the E7 once again brought home a rock solid finish. Not too far off the event win. Looked like they were going to go on and tag a 2nd in category and a 16th overall. This all set up by their very strong run in the prologue earlier in the day. The Detoys were their closest rivals, and as we said in the beginning of the show during the highlights on the E-class for the prologue, the E's are very hard to call. Detoys, Krugers, Putter, and as well as Fincham and Geldernace as the championship leaders. It's never too far between these guys to decide who's going to walk away with the podiums. For Christo Rose and Tian Swart in the G22, they were challenging inside of the podium placings, trying to see if it was going to be a 2nd or a 3rd place and trying to get up to the back wheel of the Mosterts. They would eventually go on to record a 3rd place in category and 14th overall. As our marshals were doing the great work, we prepared ourselves to go on into the final 60 kilometers of the event. Join us after the break to see who walks away as victors at round 5 of the championship.
We don't get on with Andy and his wife, do we?
In my eyes, she's a loudmouth. She can't keep a trap shut.
An obsession that's divided two rival families for 40 years.
She doesn't like us and we don't like her.
She don't know when to button it.
Their battlefield, stock car racing. A deadly game that's already almost claimed one of their lives.
They want to be the best and they want to be at the top. And we want to be the best and we want to be at the top as well.
You're going out there to win, end up.
This is the story behind one stock car season.
What goes on track should stay on track.
This week on Automondio, we're taking a look at the all-new BMW 8 Series Grand Coupe, a low-slung saloon version of the new 8 Series that aims to take the Porsche Panamera off its perch. And we have the latest hybrid SUV from Lexus. Is it good enough to remain competitive against its European rivals? That's Automondio, only on Ignition. DSTV, channel 189.
Closing in on the end of the event and hanging out at the finish line. Unfortunately, a couple of stories, and this is the story with cross-country racing. A lot of cars starting to pull out as the kilometers ticked off. First to lose out was the D25. A loss of brakes, straight up on the trailer, and heading home to the workshop. P111, issues with the accelerator pedal. The D44, unfortunately, some issues on the big Land Cruiser. The T29 hitting a donga and hurting the lower back of the driver. He's okay, but they decided to step out of the race. The crews that stayed in the event, starting out with the P3 of Keith McInerney and Tiello Mochibileli. Unfortunately, after their great qualifier, they got lost in the main race and took down around about 10 places. But they fought through to take a much-deserved win in Class P. An incredible drive and a great arrival at the beginning of the second half of the championship tour. On for a definite top 10 overall, eventually plying the field and getting themselves up to 13th position. The deep dust certainly looked like the huge tyres and traction for the special vehicles was actually starting to come into play. We thought this would be a 4x4 track, but a couple of surprise packages in the open wheels showing how strong these vehicles truly are. Vos Prinsloo and Andre Vermeulen, they charged as hard as they dare. Remember, they were coming back from a low qualifier. Eventually, they got themselves up inside the top 15 and would be credited with a top 12 overall. It wouldn't be a class win in the Class Ts, but it certainly was one of the drives of the day, coming through almost the entire pack. A new pairing on the tour, Vos has been in with Kenneth Venter the most of the way through the season, and now with the ultra experience of Andre Vermeulen, the next level and the next step had been made. Matthias Tatoy and James O'Mahony in the D11. They also got a good run going and brought home some good bacon to get themselves on points. A drive that would credit them with an 11th position overall and an emphatic second position in class, their best to date. Down to the ground. It was as if we were racing in the Desert 1000. This was the sand and ultra dry conditions that faced us here at Bloemfontein for the 4th round of the championship tour. It was clear round 5 was going to change up the championship in Class Ds as we came forward into the second half of the tour. After a poor qualifier in the prologue, Vickers Haasbroek and Jurgen Smith had to hammer down in the G21 the whole way through the main event. Incredibly enough, they managed to plough the entire field of the G-Class to get themselves up to 2nd overall in class and a top 10. That's counting against all of the production vehicles and the special vehicles. These Class Gs are really something special, and this kid is something special indeed. Without the use of his lower limbs, driving with his right arm controlling brake and accelerator and left arm controlling the steering, Vickers is an absolute legend of the sport and still so young in his career. Great driving to get up to the number 2 spot. For Stijn Viviers and Richard Carey, who had all of the local support on the sidelines, it's their home race. They were crowd favourites, and everywhere they went, you could literally hear the hooter blowing as they walked away with their first Class S victory of the 2019 season. Great driving and so cool to see one of the local superstars shine high. And the prep that they have done on the twin-turbo diesel has really started to pay dividends in the second half of the tour. Highest overall finish for them as well put them first of the single digits, 9th place overall for the S777. For Lawrence van Beek and Moni Roux, who were very quiet in the morning session, they knew they were going to be up against it in the Class Ds. They eventually walked away with the category win. And with it, single digits, they got themselves up into an incredibly high 8th place overall. D-Class was so strong, putting the Toys down into 2nd place, and you had to go a long way down the road to pick up on the Smiths and Dupree pairing down in 21st that would walk away with the 3rd position on category. But for Van Beek and Roux, a faultless effort for the D1 to have that incredibly high finish. For the G2s, it was all about getting clear air or clearish air, qualifying inside the top 10 out of the prologue, even though they had that problem with the puncher. No punches in the main event, staying on point and actually climbing higher up the overall order as the race went on. The incredible pairing of Werner and Leon Mostert, brothers in arms, driving out of the Motonetics Can-Am Maverick, would walk away with another Class G win and a 7th place overall against some massive big hitters. The G-Class able to show what they really can do. A lot of development happening with these vehicles the last couple of seasons, and it's this pair that are credited with a lot of those local developments driving out of Motonetics. In the Class Ts, the big story was fastest qualifier Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlingace in the T5. Leading the race after that great drive in the prologue, but they encountered a closed gate and had to bump it open, unfortunately causing themselves a puncher in the process. They lost many positions changing that flat and had to fight hard to end up 5th in class. A tough situation for the drivers that had done so much work in the morning session to get themselves into that place. They'd have been absolutely cursing the farmer who closed that gate. Still, the pace was there, and the form is definitely on for the Harry Smith duo in the T5. The T10, the first and only entry at this round for the 4x4 Mega World squad. Dylan Fenter alongside Donovan Lubber, really polished in the 2019 tour. They would eventually go on to get themselves a number 5 finish overall and a 4th place in class. They have been on the box previously in this season, so just one position off shows they were definitely carrying that momentum forward into the second half of the tour, and they are standout favourites to walk away with a top 3 placing come the end of this championship chase. Dylan Fenter and Donovan Lubber absolutely loved the conditions in the T10 out here at the Bloemfontein event to mark round 5 of their namesake championship. So, who was going to make it into the incredible top 4? There weren't too many names left out there on the list. For Malcolm and Frans Koch, their first time of racing together in the left-hand drive version of the NWM Ford Rangers. This is the car that had been spec'd for the Brazilians Marcus Boomgaard and Kleber Cincia in the previous couple of seasons, and now Malcolm was absolutely loving it, coming to grips with it. Frans had been on point the whole way through the day with the notes. The T8 crew also encountered a closed gate which lost them time on the race. They would eventually go forward, taking 4th place overall, 3rd in category, and incredibly, when you listen to the numbers, 1, 2 and 3 in Class T were separated by just 1 minute. Up the road then were Ernest Roberts and Henry Kerner in the Nissan Navara. The T333 had done an incredible job the whole way through the day to run the numbers and get on point. it was going to be a third in overall, second in class, separated by less than 30 seconds off the back wheel of the leaders. The Class T's giving us the closest event on the season to date. Roberts and Kerner, third overall, second in class. So it was a new man on the tour, Richard Leek Jr. and Zahir Baranya in the ATS T96 Ranger. These guys had come out never in a chair together, doing a shakedown to prepare themselves for the upcoming national event, and Leek and Badanya charged hard to bring home an emphatic second overall and the win in Class T's, just beating out Roberts and Kerner by a slender 30 seconds. I think we may have found a new superstar on the tour, and hopefully there's enough budget in the ATS camp to see these guys out once again as we close in on the second half of the championship tour. And once again, it was the giant killers, the A3 of Stefan van Pletsen and Jaco Pieterse. They were first out in the morning session. They have been the team and car to beat the whole way through the tour since the arrival just a couple of months ago for round number 1. Van Pletsen and Pieterse once again charged to an overall win, putting just 20 seconds between themselves and second place overall, Leek and Badanya. As far as the open wheels goes though, it was a long way down the road to pick up on Macanetti and Mochabileli. Liv Lesotho were once again on top at Bloemfontein. At the prize giving then, everyone knew that they had chased hard with a high attrition rate here of just around about half the field losing out, with the rest of the half bringing home the bacon. It was going to be changing up how the championship points were going to be running. For Gold Co Midas, we handed out some amazing prizes and got ourselves ready for the celebrations. We were officially now inside of the second half of the championship tour, and Bloemfontein, with a brand new venue, brand new terrain and brand new partners and sponsors coming on board, made sure that we're going to be looking good as we went forward into the 2020 planning of the championship. Once again, a big thanks to Gold Co Midas, Zarco Motors, and of course our main title sponsor for the 2019 season, 4x4 Megaworld, for helping us out with some huge prizes as we get ourselves ready to go forward and confirm the position finishers and category winners in each of the events that we have covered.
Drive safe, drive with care, and we'll see you all at Stella. Thank you very much.
Here's a breakdown and confirmation of the results then, taking the overall, and the win in Class A's was Van Pletsen and Pieterse, with Kruger and Becker unfortunately DNFing. For the Class P's, it was a breakout win on the season from Macanetti and Mochabileli, with the rest of the Class P's unable to make it to the finish line. For the Class B's, Benerick and Piers Botma unable to bring it to the finish line, as well as the only entry into the category. For the overall specials, the open wheelers, it was Van Pletsen ahead of Macanetti, with the rest of the open wheelers not making the gate. A high attrition rate here at Bloemfontein. For production vehicle Class D's, great tight racing. Van Veek and Roux winning out ahead of DeToy and O'Mahony, and Smith and Dupria. In the Class E's, it was DeToy and Sutherland beating out on Aki and Jean-Andre Kruger. For the Class G side-by-sides, another big win coming in for the brothers, Werner and Leon Mostert, ahead of Vickers Haasbroek and Jurgen Smith, Christo Rose and Tian Swat rounding out the podium for the side-by-sides. Production vehicle Class T, an incredibly close race with just a minute separating the top three. Leek and Badanya, Roberts and Kerner, and the Cox, Malcolm and France. In the Class S, Stain Viviers and Richard Carey get their first win of the season, ahead of Pete and Benjamin Kotze. For overall production vehicles, Leek and Badanya taking the overall ahead of Roberts and Kerner, with Malcolm and Franz Koch taking third ahead of Dylan Fencher and Donovan Lubber, Jacques Van Tonde and Sammy Redlinghayes in fifth, and Werner and Leon Mostert still categorized as production vehicles in the Can-Am Maverick. After the event, we caught up with Keith Macanetti and Tielo Mochabileli to talk about their breakout drive.
The good thing, once you don't get out of the car, you always have a very good event. Only we got a little bit of a navigation issue where we got lost. Otherwise, it would have even been better than it was today. But the route was perfect. We enjoyed it thoroughly.
The dust was very bad, but other than that, it was a lovely race. Great thank you to the sponsors, and we hope to do that again next year.
So we round out round number 5 racing action courtesy of 4x4 Mega World in association with Zelco Motors and Midas Gold Co. Join us for the next event on the tour, Stella, on the 24th of August for round number 6. We'll be there once again bringing you all of the action.